I've wanted to make Battlemat tutorials and terrain tutorials for a long time, since before I was even a YouTuber. So what I'm about to show you is not only very, very cool and has, yes, a flexible water effect, but it's my very first large-scale terrain tutorial, and I really hope you like it. This is Savage Brewski. I'm going to show you how to make water. So I use this handy dandy little program called Incarnate to lay out what I wanted this Battlemat to be. This is basically a beach with a semi-futuristic dock on it, and it's meant to be attacker-defender kind of setup. So you have somebody on the dock trying to get onto the beach and somebody on the beach trying to kick them back. Do I need to say more? I really don't. So the first big thing is to cut out your Battlemat. And I'm basically doing this on a 4x4 piece of underlayment. It's kind of like thin plywood. And this probably looks a little different than the mat or the cloth that you were probably expecting. A lot of Battlemat tutorials use drop cloth with a plastic backing. And it's usually this really thick weave cloth. I've heard some of the guys over in the UK call it Hessian weave. That's not totally inaccurate, but this is more like paper. This is a product you can find at, Home Depot, Lowe's. I found this on Amazon, and it is plastic-backed paper. It's kind of like surgical paper, so it's actually fairly tough. And the first thing here is just to cut this out, and I'm going to tape it, basically, to the back of a 4x4 piece of wood, which is going to give us something we can actually work against and scrape against. As a note, with this material, it is a lot thinner than cloth. You don't need to worry too much about wrinkles. A lot of times if you're using actual drop cloth, I will see people iron these in tutorials. You don't have to do this on this paper product. It just comes out in the wash once you start putting down your acrylic caulking. And I also prefer staples normally, but I tried that on this. It was a bit too rough. It actually would just tear. So just use tape if you're using this paper product. It works absolutely fine. So the next thing I'm doing, you can see I've actually got the mocked up map down. I'm just marking out kind of where I want the water to come up to on one side of the board. The orientation I've got the map there is kind of where that is. And I'm just kind of winging it. I know that's going to be, no more than a third of the board. 2/3 are going to be the beach or the sand and the rocks. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm just kind of going from the end and just kind of marking out, literally just making dots every so often of how far I want that to go up. Now, the way I'm going to do this is the first thing I'm getting down is I'm actually going to spray the blue, even though we have a blue paper cloth here. I'm going to spray down some blue to actually create the undercolor for the water. Now it is going to be a flexible water effect. It is going to work on a Battlemat, and it is going to be somewhat see-through. But I still want to put down color here just so there is a difference, and also so that when I'm actually putting down the beach effect, which is going to go first, the sand part of the mix is going to go first, that I can see what's going to be water very easily and what isn't. Now for this, I'm just using some Montana 94 spray paint. I really like their range, their color. It's not too pricey, and they ship just about anywhere via Spraypaint, so it's really handy for terrain in weird colors. I'm just kind of evening this out here. You can't see it from the angle too well, but I had dark blue down first. I'm lightening that up just a little bit so there's some variation. And the next thing I'm going to do is along the line where the water is meeting the beach, I'm going to just make a bright blue line, which is sort of the super shallow where the water actually meets the beach. This is already shallow. This is not anything like going out to the continental shelf of the ocean, if you know your oceanography and geography terms. This is just, again, to give it a little more kick, a little more difference, and really show where does the beach begin, the water end. And again, this is going down first because the water effect will be transparent and the beach will be a layer of acrylic caulking. So I really want to have this down and done because it tells me where the caulking needs to end. And now for everybody's favorite part, the acrylic caulking. So I just have a cheap little paint tray here, and I'm going to decant out. This is going to show about 2 tubes. I really needed about 3.5, I think, by the end of this. I had to mix up a second batch. Here's where I go a little bit off script. Every tutorial I see with an acrylic caulk Battlemat, people are adding sand or even some gravel. And at this stage, mixing it, I'm just going to tell you that I probably will never do that, okay? When you're adding acrylic caulking to a Battlemat, and when you scrape it down, you don't want it so thin that the caulking will crack. If you do something that's less than, say, I think it's about 3 millimeters, you want no more than probably 1/8 of an inch, I would say, but no less than 2-3 millimeters, something like that, something about halfway. If it's that thick, a grain of sand or a small pebble is either going to be too small so it doesn't even stand above the caulking when you smooth it out, or it's going to be too big and it's actually going to rip through all your caulking, so it doesn't really work either way. I see people do these and they say it adds texture to the Battlemat, it adds something to it. I think it's too thin when you do it that way. So I'm not bothering. I think that's just a level of detail on Battlemats that you don't need to do at all. I'm not bothering. So all this is acrylic caulking. I'm going to thin it down with some isopropyl alcohol, and then I'm going to add paint to get the color I basically want. The way I'm doing this, by the way, you do not have to, religiously get this exactly the color you want, because as you've seen, I use spray paints. And they are great for textures, for highlighting, low lighting, making colors the way you want them to be. It's something that I don't often see people do. A couple guys like Berserker Works use them, and they work pretty well. But I, for the most part, see people, they try to get the color perfect on the acrylic itself, and they don't go nuts on the spraying. I don't care. Get it close so your base coat is solid. Otherwise, let the spray paint do the work. It's totally fine. Trust me. Now for the fun part. So we've got the color basically where we want it. This is a nice sandy tan. And all we're going to do is spread this out in dollops all over the area we want it to be. So it's kind of like lining up a cookie sheet. You just take a bunch, slam it down every couple inches. Don't worry too much about where it is. Just make sure you don't put any of this. If you're doing the Battlemat like I do, don't put it on the water, because you cannot get that color off once it's on, and it's going to give additional thickness we don't want. If it makes sense, the beach should at least be level with the water. That's why I did this in the sequence I did. The water should not obviously be higher than the land it's coming up to, if that makes sense. If you put a dollop of this down in the water, then you'll have a little sandbar sticking up, and when you go to put the water effect down, it's going to stand above everything. And if you're kind of puritanical about heights and physics and all that stuff, it's just going to look very, very odd. So be careful. Next up, get your handy dandy scraper and start pulling those dollops so they flatten out onto your Battlemat. And you can see I'm starting close to the water line here. And all I'm doing just to keep that line clean is I start to drag the caulking parallel to the line that I want. You can pull it down in a way, in other words, towards the landward part or the bottom part from your orientation of the Battlemat, like that. And if you do that, it just means you get a lot cleaner edge. Doesn't need to be perfect. I can always go in with the water. I can always respray on this. You'll see what I do in a minute. But that way you just get a very clean, defined edge, and you don't have to worry about messing that up. Running out of caulking at the worst possible place, kind of like I'm going to, etc. As I said, I did have to mix up more caulking so that this would actually go the length I needed it to. Again, I think this whole thing was about 3.5 tubes for 2/3 of a 4x4 board. And thickness wise, it's right where I want it. It's between that 2-3 millimeters and 1/8 of an inch. People just say, get this so you can't hear your scraper scraping against the paper. and so you can't see the weave underneath. Now this paper does not really have much of a weave. It's very smooth, so I could not use that as a guideline. If you're using the same paper, don't look for it to judge the thickness. You're really going to want to feel that out with your scraper. I recommend even wasting a mat. Make a little mat for a club or a friend or something who really just doesn't have anything to work with. Test it out and get a feel for it before you do this. This was the second or third attempt using this material, so I had a little more experience with it, a little more of a gauge or a yardstick, I guess you might say. At this point, I'm also just thinning it out and really going over. You'll see there's lines on there, and again, I'm not super worried about those because they're just going to be painted over. There's going to be scatter on them. I don't really care. You just do your best and you gently drag this over to eliminate those. If you want, you can even put a little bit of isopropyl on your scraper, and as you pull it across, it'll just smooth out the caulking right under it and just get rid of the lines. Don't go for perfect. Just get it mostly smooth. It'll be totally fine. Trust me. And there it is. The sand is all laid out. You can see I did the thickness pretty well. There's a couple of blue spots you can see sticking through. Not a big deal. It's not the end of the world at all. You just generally want the thickness there to prevent the mat from cracking. That's all. That's really why you have thickness to an acrylic caulk battle mat at all. It's just to prevent it from cracking. You just want it to roll and bend and keep a shape. Here's a closer look once that dried. As you can see, there are imperfections. There's a couple lines, there's some splotches. We're going to handle that two ways, so don't worry about that. So the first thing I'm going to do is just start breaking up the solid color. And I'm using, this looks like it would be darker, but it actually comes out lighter, as you'll see in a minute. Yep, there you go. So all I'm trying to do is break up the color so that there's not just this flat, endless whatever. I kind of wanted this to look a little bit different, a little bit more lively. The spray paint here is also really good for covering up the darker spots, any blue that's showing through from the mat underneath. It solves a lot of problems. So just be very random, be light, be dark in other places, and just kind of break up the solidity. Now I'm going to use a lighter brown, and I am going to do two things here. One is I'm going to, first off, delineate the water line. I'm actually spraying right along where the water, I think, would come up further. In other words, where you see the blue end is sort of not quite the high water mark, and that just makes it look a little bit more like wet sand along that edge. And the other thing is I'm going to splotch this around here and there on the inland side of things, just to, again, keep breaking it up and keep giving a difference there. All right, now for the secret. This is DAP modified polymer. This is not silicone. If you've watched anyone over in the UK talk about Clearfix for water, it's kind of like a flexible alternative, and they'll use it for waterfalls or wave effects. This is the stuff. And the reason you don't want silicone is it doesn't stick to things and doesn't mix with things very well, okay? You can't paint it, you can't tint it, you can't do anything with it. So in the States, this is what you want to get if you're looking for the equivalent product. This took a hell of a long time for me to decant out 2 tubes. And you can see it's got a little jiggle, but it is very firm. So at this point, I'm going to throw in a little bit of isopropyl alcohol just to thin that down and get it a little bit more workable. Don't need much. I probably used a capful or 2. And that's all we're going to do is just thin it out a little bit here. Next, coloring. I have this sort of aqua ultramarine ink. It's just acrylic ink. Again, the reason we didn't use silicone is because this will actually take ink. So I'm just going to put in a few drops and give this a nice sort of bright translucent blue. Sort of like Caribbean water, real clear water if you've seen it. That's all we're really going for here. And then just like we did for the sand, you're just going to take that out and smear it on the water portion and try to even that out as best you can. Now, just like with the sand portion, you're going to grab your scraper and start pulling this away from the beach so that it evens out across the water section. The only difference is when it comes to finishing this out, you don't want the lines to be going sort of vertically against the beach. You want it to look like there's waves in this textured water. So I'm going to pull it back and forth like you see there. Once it's all spread out, that's where I want the lines to be. I'm okay if there's lines running the length of that water. I don't want it looking, I don't want it looking like the waves are perpendicular to the beach, if that makes sense. From there, I'm just using a small stick and I'm just sort of teasing the stuff near the shoreline so that A, I know it's up as far as I want it to go, and B, I can get a little bit of definition right there with the coat I just put down. This is not super thick, so it really doesn't create very big waves. We're going to do that once this dries, but this is, for little ones, for a start, will work just fine. Now that we let that dry overnight, we're going to add the actual waves. I'm just going to do a couple of these here and there near the shore. So all you do is get the same material, it's the DAP modified polymer, and you just squeeze out a line of this stuff. It doesn't have to be perfectly linear. It's pliable, it's workable. You can tease it a bit, just get a line of it where you want a wave to be and start working it up. Now, most of this water, the way I'm doing it, is going to be covered by a platform, so you don't really need to see much. I had a couple people look at this in pictures on Instagram and ask me why I didn't make more waves. That's why. I just put these near the shore because that's really what's going to be visible, and the rest of it is just going to be covered by platform mostly. But you get the same idea. You can put as many or as little on as you want. This is where it's really up to you and what you're going to do with the mat. If this is more like a virgin beach, or you don't have a dock, you don't have a jetty, you don't have a platform right there, go nuts. Do as many waves as you want. The other thing is I didn't bother painting this. This is just straight modified polymer, and I'm just teasing it forward so you get the hint of a wave there. I don't paint white. I don't put anything over the top of it other than sealing this whole thing with a little bit of clear varnish or clear coat. I don't do anything else to it. I think the wave looks fine as it is. That's really up to you, though. And that's all there is to the water effect. Spray the whole mat with clear coat, and you're ready to game. Anyway, I will give you guys further tutorials on the scatter I make for this, but for right now, that's the Battlemat. If you want to see those videos, please do subscribe and stick around. If you have questions about how I made this or anything particular, please leave them in the comments. I'll see you on the next video. Take care.